Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the Stronger Strides podcast. So today, as episode 1, we're going to do some intro stuff. I have my computer with my notes. We're going to talk about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the very first couple days that I went through with my little man. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alrighty, so for this first podcast, we are only going to cover the first couple days of Anders' illness. So that would be from Wednesday, June 12th to Friday, June 14th. If you see me looking down, it's because that's where my notes are. Now, the very first couple things I kind of want to say are, disclaimer, I'm not a vet. I am a horse owner with a passion for my babies, and I was very fortunate to work with my astounding, outstanding, amazing farrier and vet team while I went through this journey. So every podcast episode we will be saying, I am not a vet, but what I do share with you is what I did with my team of professionals. So it was informed and guided and helped by all of them. So I just want to make sure I get that out of the way. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is tears. We may get through tears. I'm usually pretty good speaking about it now that I'm a few months down and he's actually okay now. But as we go through this, it is an emotional journey. Anybody with horses knows they have our hearts and they control our lives. So, tears may pop up. It might be emotional. And I will at some point acknowledge the mental health journey that I went on, because there was a point in time walking down to the barn to check on him at some point, and I was having a good cry, and I told my husband at the time, I said, I feel like I'm grieving and I'm coping, or I can't cope. I feel grief and I can't cope with it. I don't know how to navigate it. So my mental health also took a bit of a turn, but thankfully I was able to connect with a professional who's also exceptional. Now, I have spoken about the illness, and what Anders got was called Potomac horse fever. Now, before we talk about his journey, I want to talk about what is Potomac horse fever. So it's an acute, and I'm getting the information from Google, but from accredited sources. So whether that be a veterinary page or an equine information page, etc. If you are listening on the podcast, you will hear my descriptions. But if you're watching on YouTube, I took some screenshots. So I will make sure to put those images up on the screen. So if you want to see the sources or where I'm getting my information or the websites, go ahead on over to YouTube. So what is Potomac horse fever? It's an acute and dangerous infection. It causes diarrhea, laminitis, fever, very colicky symptoms. It's caused by a bacteria, mostly found in aquatic insects. Most commonly occurs late summer, early fall. However, our vets have been remarking that it's been coming in sooner and able to be present later on. It's not contagious between horses. So if anybody's worried about my other horses, as I was, one of the very first questions I had was about quarantining. It is not contagious between horses. So basically it's a bacterial infection, and it causes severe colic-like symptoms, inflammation, diarrhea. Laminitis is a risk, and as you know, it is something that happened to my guy. The aquatic animals, so kind of like dragonflies, mosquitoes, mayflies, anything like that, if those bugs are carrying the bacteria and they go to a water source or a food source or a piece of grass or something that the horse then ingests, from my understanding, that's how the horse gets infected. I can't pronounce the organism, Neoricotisa ristici. That's from Equine Disease ECC.org. I can't really pronounce it, but that is the bacteria. Can affect any breed, any type of horse. Basically, it comes with high fever, and the fever can occur for 7 to 14 days before signs of colitis. So colitis is our diarrhea, yay. So they can be feverish for a really long time. The diarrhea comes in, and diarrhea, we know, can be really tough for horses in terms of keeping them hydrated. And in my case, we lost a lot of protein. Causes, lots of appetite, lethargy, so low energy, laminitis, colicky stuff, decreased tummy sounds, so their gastrointestinal sounds, those can go way down, which my guy did. The edema of limbs and ventral body, and prepuce of males. So basically edema is like that swelling and that inflammation in that liquid where we don't have protein there to help. From my understanding, I'm not sure if it's metabolized or processed, but the edema pockets develop on the horse's body. So my guy had that. And like we said, horses get Potomac fever from eating grass or drinking water that was, accidentally ingested, that was contaminated by the bacteria. My vet and I have no idea, how this happened. I shouldn't say we don't know how it happened. We obviously know how it happened. But I'm in a very dry area. I clean my horses' buckets every day. I keep their troughs clean and fresh, fresh water. I don't live near any creeks or rivers or any like watery areas. So it was very surprising, I guess, that my guy managed to get it. Now we're going to move on to just laminitis super quickly. Laminitis is every horse owner's nightmare. Basically, laminitis itself, from my understanding, again, this is me interpreting from my farriers, my vets, and my fresh Google results. Laminitis is inflammation of the laminae, and the laminae are like, I don't know if nerve is the correct term, but I kind of associated them with nerves that connect or anchor the coffin bone, the P3 that's inside the foot, to the wall of the foot. So it's very painful. It can damage the hoof. And there's lots of different types and causes for laminitis. So we know Anders' cause of laminitis was a toxic septic event from getting sick, the fever, the inflammation, the illness. There are metabolic conditions that can trigger laminitis. Horses can get it from like being injections. They can get it from vaccines. Any kind of inflammation in the body can trigger laminitis. Anders, fingers crossed, does not have a chronic laminitis, so it's not something that continues occurring over and over in kind of small bursts. He had acute laminitis, so which is a really painful, really severe, kind of blow all the laminae up all at once in my case, all of his hooves. Boom. But then kind of once it was done, and now we're just trying to recover that hoof. We took the x-rays, which we'll get into in a later episode, to see, what that damage was. Did we have any sinking of the coffin bone, any rotation? So there's lots of different types of laminitis. Metabolic concerns are often associated with laminitis. So if you have a metabolic pony, keep an eye on their feet. The next thing we monitor with the laminitis is the digital pulse. So I had to Google like a good definition for a digital pulse because I can't feel it myself. But basically, it's a pulse that can be felt as the blood flows through the artery into the horse's foot. So the vets and farriers, they would run their hands down the back of my guy's leg. They would find that tendon or that artery or that pulse. And the more increased the pulse, the more inflammation, risk of laminitis, etc. So when you hear somebody say, "Oh, my horse had a bounding digital pulse," we don't really want that. Now, don't freak out. It is natural to be able to feel your horse's digital pulse like normally. Sometimes you also cannot find the horse's digital pulse in that way. But if your horse's digital pulse is bounding and there's inflammation in the tissues or the hoof or the leg, etc., the blood flow will be restricted, so you'll be able to feel that pulse a little, more easily and a little stronger. The next couple things I just wanted to cover super quickly were horses' regular vitals, because as we go through this podcast and these episodes, I'm going to be talking a lot about Anders' vitals. Horse's regular temperature, the horse's regular respiratory rate, and the horse's regular heart rate. Those are the ones that you'll mostly hear me talk about. So basically, a horse's regular temperature, in Canada, we go with Celsius, so it's 37.5 to 38.5 degrees Celsius, according to Google, which the website that came up was BW Equine Vets. I vaguely feel like my vet said anywhere from 36 to 38 can be normal, but according to this website, that's what we got. The heart rate should be resting heart rate between 36 and 40 beats a minute, and the respiratory rate should be 8 to 16 breaths a minute. So when you hear me talk about Anders's vitals, if you will, and you're hearing all of those as raised or increased or abnormal, those are all because of the illness. So we talk about how horses can get Potomac horse fever. Again, we don't really know exactly how Anders got it. I'm guessing it was something he ate rather than something he drank, because like I said, I clean all my horses' buckets in their stalls every day, and they all share the same water trough. So if one trough had been contaminated, I would have suspected one or more horses to also be affected. So I'm guessing he managed to find the blade of grass that had the bacteria on it, and away he went. So that's what I'm gonna kind of guess. Now let's jump into how it unfolded. So like I said, we're gonna cover the first couple days in this first episode of the podcast. It'll show you those first instances, what I noticed, what I tracked, when I started tracking, how I tracked, and our response in those first couple days. So day 1, we call it, was Wednesday, June 12th of 2024. Basically, I had done my normal routine. The horses had come in during the day. He ate his breakfast. Everything was normal. But then when I fed them their dinner, and when I went to turn them out at night, because here in Canada in the summer, we get really hot, buggy, muggy, humid days, but nicer evenings. So my horses come in during the day to get away from the grossness outside, and then they go back out overnight. I noticed he didn't eat his dinner that first night, and that he was kind of dragging his feet. He was really like low energy being turned out that night. So the very first thing I did was I got my dad, because I'm lucky enough to have very close, very savvy, very knowledgeable horse people. My mom wasn't home at the time. She's the one who actually started my whole horse life. So if I could have got her, I would have. But basically, I got my dad. He also took a look at him, said, yep, doesn't look right. And I happened to have Banamine on hand. So I gave him 5 cc's of Banamine orally, which means I syringed it down his throat. And I called the vet. So when I called the vet, it was, of course, the emergency / after hours kind of contact. And I reached a vet that I had not worked with before. So my clinic has their regular vets, and they have their after hours vets, etc. And it just happened to be a vet who was on call that I hadn't worked with before. And my vet, I'm not going to name any names, obviously, or clinics or anything like that. But the very first vet that I got was truthfully very useless. He tried to convince me that he didn't need to come out. He tried to tell me I shouldn't be as worried. It wasn't a big deal, etc., etc. So in the process, I decided, I said, no, I want you to come out. Please show up. And then I texted my regular vet saying, here's what I'm dealing with horse-wise, and here's what I'm dealing with the on-call vet. So she had said, if he doesn't show up, I will come. But he did show up. In the meantime, I had kept Anders walking, at this time thinking it was colic, because I was like, this horse would jump through a mountain of fire and sharks to eat food. If he's not eating food, that's 1, not normal, and 2, he's just acting a little colicky. He hadn't rolled, but he was kind of looking at his tummy. So I kept him walking, waiting for the vet. He had a poop, soft poo. We are going to talk a lot about poo on this channel. So if you don't like talking about poo, this isn't the episode for you or the show for you. There's going to be a lot of poo talk. Because as you know, in animals, horses, poo, we monitor poo. It tells us a lot of things. So basically, he had a soft poo. After the Banamine, he perked up a little bit. I think he had a drink that night. The vet finally arrived, and my comment to myself was that he was, in fact, still useless. So I would say his bedside manner could be improved, but again, he was good with the horse. Like, he wasn't rough or rude or mean or cruel with Anders. It was just with me. Basically, he said, yep, he's got a temperature. Yeah, his breathing's a little high. If the Banamine helped, I'll top up the Banamine, because I'd given him 5 cc's, and for Anders' weight class, he was allowed 10 cc's every 12 hours. So he topped up his Banamine, agreed that he had the symptoms, but at this time he said, it's pretty early for something like Potomac horse fever, so I'm not going to give him any antibiotics, leave him out overnight, see how he is in the morning. So he stayed out, and my vet, said, I updated her saying what happened and what we did, and she had kind of planned to come the next morning to do like a follow-up just to make sure we were improving and on track. As such, we were not improving and on track. I brought him in the next morning, as usual. I came down a little early because, I was worried about him. The clinic had called to say, yes, your regular vet's going to come out and do a follow-up. And I said, great. Brought him in, got everybody in, did their breakfast. He still didn't want to eat. And this is when he tried to lay down. And I said, no, thinking, again, we're colicking. We're not laying down. We're not rolling. We're getting up. And I let my vet know, hey, he's trying to lay down. Can you come any sooner? So she arrived a little bit sooner than planned. Because he had not been given antibiotics for Potomac horse fever by the previous vet, she was able to collect a sample that we could test to 100% confirm, yes, this is a case of Potomac horse fever. If the previous vet had administered antibiotics, she would not have been able to do that test because the antibiotics would have been in his system. So sometimes I'm like, would, the 16 hours between vet calls, if he had been given that first dose of antibiotics, would that have helped his case? Or because we were able to test his poop and confirm it was Potomac horse fever, was that answer, valuable? And it turned out that he had Potomac horse fever, but there was also a secondary bacteria present, etc. We'll get into that later. But basically, my vet took the sample. She began the antibiotic treatment for Potomac horse fever. She gave him IV fluid. So we got a catheter in his neck, in his stall, and we gave him a few liters of fluids that day. She said she would come by. I think she had a vet call like nearby my place. So she was going to go do that call and come back to take out the IV fluids, not the catheter. And that's when she said, FYI, laminitis is a risk of Potomac horse fever. Start icing his feet now. So I said, okie doke. So we went and basically cleaned out our gas station and made ice bags, and we started icing his feet like right away. She came back later that day. He was kind of the same. She said, keep him inside. We're not going to put him back out now. And we're going to see how he does, basically. So that's all Thursday, June 13th. We left the catheter in his neck, kind of anticipating we're either going to need to give more medication in the vein or he's going to need more fluids. So we're going to keep that catheter in to make our lives simple so that we're not trying to hit that vein over and over and over. So basically, the instructions for Thursday came with flushing the catheter because we didn't want any buildup happening in that tube. The Banamine he could get, when he could get it, when to take his temperature, when to give Banamine if he was uncomfortable, etc. I asked if I could try, because at this point he obviously had a fever. I said, can I be sponging him down to try to keep him cool? She said, absolutely. He's okay for hay overnight. We're going to soak his feed to make it easy on his tummy. And we're going to keep icing those feet, try to keep them cool, try to prevent the laminitis, or at least mitigate the effects of laminitis should it arrive. And the vet's going to come back tomorrow to check again. So she left, and then I was on my own until the next day. Now we're going to get into my timed notes. So anyone who knows me will know I love my lists, I love my notes, I love my observations. And because I'm very emotional and I'm very attached, I get really worried about missing something or forgetting to tell the vet something or forgetting something. Oops, I just hit the microphone. Forgetting something happened that might have been important. So I actually started my notes, and I did it in like an observational way. So I put like a timestamp and what the observation was. Timestamp, observation, timestamp. Or if it was a task, like I gave him the Banamine, or I gave him food, or he pooped, or he ate, or he drank, etc. Because I'm trying to monitor at this point basically everything. So, and at this point too, my vet had told me he's allowed to lay down because he's not colicking. So if his feet are starting to hurt and it's laminitis, it's actually good for him to be off his feet. So if he wants to lay down, let him lay down. Keep track of what side he stays on for how long, because it can be tough on horses' organs to remain on one side for too long. So we might have to flip him if he needs help. So at this point I had started tracking whether he was standing or laying down, which comes into importance later because we had to track how often he was down versus up, because he was down like almost 24 hours a day. So I have a 5:40 note PM on Thursday saying he's still laying down. At 7 he stood up, and I at this point tried to take him outside to give him a little bit of fresh air, but he didn't want to. So I said, no problem, put him back, like left him alone and put ice on his feet. I noted that I was still icing him at 7:25, and that at 7:47 we had a wettish poo. And at this point, I'm also taking photos. So I take pictures of everything because then I can actually show my vets. That way they're not trying to interpret my interpretation of something that I couldn't keep because I'm keeping his stall clean, etc. So I'm taking photos. At 8:18 p.m. that night, our temperature was 39.9, which is fever. At 8:30, I took the ice away and I actually poulticed. For anybody who doesn't know, like a clay poultice, we use it to reduce inflammation and cool legs down and stuff after, whether they're swollen or if they've had intense exercise, or it's like a relief. So I put poultice on the outside of his hoof, hoping that might help draw out some heat. And I gave him his Banamine for his temperature and his inflammation. So he got that at 8:30. 9:08, I flushed his catheter. His temperature had risen again to 41.3, which is super fever. We had more pee, damp sponged him down, trying to keep him cool. He did have a drink. He was nibbling on his hay and he was standing up, shuffling, walking around. So at this point I knew like laminitis had struck, because when the vet had left, it hadn't quite fully wham bam, thank you ma'am, we are laminitic. It hadn't hit yet, but at this point I'm like, yep, we're laminitic. So at 10:30, that night it was storming. I have a note that it was a big storm, so I came to spend time with him. And I brought the ice bags. I started icing his feet again. He had shavings all over him, so I thought he was laying down, but he was standing up when I walked in, and there was a small poo that I took photos of. At 10:57, so about a half an hour later, we laid back down. He was flat on his side. His temperature was 40, so we had come down a degree and a bit, and I flushed his catheter. Around 11, he was having a couple little rolls, but I couldn't tell if they were out of discomfort or he was just itchy, because I had been damp sponging him, so he was a little bit like halfway between wet and dry. So sometimes, horses like to roll. At 11:06, we had a small wet poo, but I didn't get a photo because he tried to escape that time when I went to get it. So at that point, I took him outside for a little bit of fresh air. He wanted to go back in the paddock, but of course we could not let him. My sad boy, he wouldn't go back outside for many a day, but I didn't know that at this point. I let him have some fresh air. It took some convincing to get him back inside. At 11:13, I put ice back on his feet because he was happy and quiet. And at this point, he was standing in my barn aisle, but like under a fan. And I was like, oh, that'll keep him cool. We'll let him stand under the fan. 45 minutes later, we're midnight, Friday, June 14th. The ice bags had totally melted. And he would not go in his stall. He refused. So he had a drink in the aisle, and 12:15, I did get him back in his stall, but I had to call my husband for help to encourage him from behind because he just wasn't moving and I didn't like pulling on him. 3:45 in the morning, our temperature is 40.7, so we're in the 40s. I gave him soaked hay and he worked on it. So at this point we started soaking his hay because, again, laminitis, the inflammation is very sensitive to sugars. So we just soaked his hay to pull as much sugar out. He was not a metabolic case of laminitis. His laminitis was triggered by the illness. But at this point, we're like, you know what, we're going to treat him like a metabolic horse to give the feet the best chance at not entirely blowing up as possible. At 3:53 in the morning, I was icing his feet, sponged him down. He was perky, but at this point, his walk was catastrophic. It was terrible. I was sure that he had laminitis, like he had been triggered into laminitis at this point. 4:30 in the morning, he was just standing on the ice bag, so I just left them until he kind of moved at 4:45 and he laid down and I was able to get the ice bags out. 6:30, he got back up. 7:20, I was icing his feet. His temperature was still 40.7. Flushed his catheter again that morning. 8:50 in the morning, he was kind of wobbling around, so I took the ice away because he was just taking a step and the ice bags were just falling off. So now we're Friday, June 14th morning. My regular vet arrived at 9 a.m. She took his temperature right away. It was 39.6, so he had come down out of 40, but we're still fevered. He laid down probably 9:30. Basically, she administered the antibiotics she needed to administer, Banamine, you know, stuff that she needed to do, and then just said, yep, keep on trucking, because there's nothing else that we could do at this point other than try to keep him cool, try to manage the fever, try to keep him eating, keep him hydrated, etc. So 10:15, gave him some more soaked hay. I tried to give him some sloppy hay cubes, 10 to 11, and he made a mess. I think I've got a picture. At 10:57, so about 11, he got up, but he was still super wobbly. And at 11:05, I gave him some more soaked hay, and he was munching on it. 11:35, had a poo, took a picture. 11:35 was the poo. 11:45 was more ice on the feet. And 11:50, we incorporated Tylenol. So Tylenol was added for pain and anti-inflammatory and to support the Banamine. But Tylenol's, as an NSAID, it's easier on horses' stomachs. So his dose was 16 tablets. We would mix it with water, and then I would give it orally. So I would syringe it down his throat. So typically I would mix it with the water. I'd let it all soak up and turn into like a liquidy Tylenol. And then I used a 60 cc syringe and got it into him. So at noon, he laid down on the opposite side to his 9:30 lay down. I flushed his catheter and I left him to rest because at this point he's got all his buddies in and I needed to sleep because I had stayed in the barn the night before. My husband went and checked on him at 1:30 and at 3 that day for me so I could have a bit of a rest, and he was still laying down. His breathing was labored. And at 4 o'clock, I went back down and he worked on some sloppy hay cubes and I gave him a sponge off. So that day, my vet came back at about 10 after 4, Friday afternoon. We, at this point, did have to roll him over because he had been on the one side for 3-4 hours, which was kind of the cutoff to when we needed to move him. So we rolled him over. His temperature had come down to 38.6, which was the lowest it had been since he got sick on Wednesday, but it would not stay down. His heart rate was 68, but coming down, and his respiratory rate was 32. I have a note that says better. I unfortunately don't have the other vitals. Going forward, I did note down vitals as much as possible. So I flushed his catheter. We gave him salt block because at this point we're like trying to keep him drinking, kind of trying to keep him hydrated, etc. So stuck a salt block in front of him because he wasn't, all my horses have salt blocks in their stalls, but because he wasn't up, he couldn't get to a salt block. So we took it out of its holder, gave it to him, and I got some instructions to get some more salt into him to try to keep him, his electrolytes up, but keep him hydrated. So that is before the overnight on Friday. So we're going to stop there with our timed notes, if you will. And I'm going to go to my kind of roundup and instructions from the vet as of her leaving Friday afternoon. So the Friday morning, he got fluids, he got Banamine, his temperature was 39.6, his heart rate was coming down after the Banamine. We checked twice, it was 80 each time lying down, but when the vet arrived, it was 92 before Banamine. His respiratory rate laying down was 40. She told me how to take it. I never took his respiratory rate. I didn't trust myself. So that was my 9 a.m. roundup. So any notes that I didn't have when I was going through those checks with you guys earlier, here they are. The instructions I have were to give him 5 cc's of Banamine at 9 p.m. if needed. It was needed. He's getting his 16 tablets of Tylenol twice a day. His catheter needs flushing every 3 to 5 hours. So the catheter is that tube in his neck. I could go a little bit longer overnight to let myself sleep. He can have sloppy hay cubes every 3 hours, soak his hay for 1 hour in cold water. And at this point, we introduced a paste probiotic. So the Equine Choice pre and probiotic powder is what my horses normally get, but my vet introduced a paste to start protecting his tummy from ulcers and just to try to make him feel good, get good bacteria in that tummy, because we were at this point pretty into the start of what would be a very critical illness. So the probiotic paste that we have, I believe for his weight, was like 4 doses per tube. So the vet gave him his first dose of that. At this point, the medication that he was getting was the vet giving him his antibiotics via IV for the Potomac horse fever. The Banamine was being given in the IV in the catheter for pain and anti-inflammatory. The vet gave him his probiotic paste, which we just talked about, and we continued that for a while. The Tylenol extra strength. I had the Equine Choice AFX. Anybody who's heard of it? It's kind of like Pepto-Bismol for horses. It's like this creamy coating that really helps with their tummies. Anybody who has stressy horses when they travel, you can give it like every 6 hours or something. It's really, really safe. So I actually have it for a different horse that recovered from ulcers a few years ago. So anytime I had to trailer him, I would give him that. Or if he looked a little bit tucked up in his tummy or something like that, I give him the AFX just to kind of soothe things down. So she said, yep, he can get that if possible. At the same time, we were syringing so much into his mouth that I wasn't ever 100% going to force it down, because I had to save those syringing times for when he really needed it. So our temperature roundup to wrap up this episode: Thursday, 8:18 p.m. we were 39.9. 9:08 p.m. we were 41.3. 10:57 p.m. we were 40. Friday, June 14th, 3:45 in the morning, we were 40.7. 7:20 in the morning, we were 40.7. When the vet came at 9 that morning, we were 39.6. And at 4:30 p.m. with the vet, we were 38.6. So that is a wrap on the details for episode 1 of the Stronger Strides podcast. So basically we covered, what Potomac horse fever is, what laminitis is, how these two things manifested and presented in Anders in those first couple of days. I will have included some of those screenshots talking about the specifics of the illnesses, if you will, or conditions. I'll throw some photos up if you're watching on YouTube. I'll put some pictures up on the screen of those first couple days of care. I mostly was taking photos of poo to keep track of how he was moving through the illness in that sense. But this was a very long and deep illness. So the first couple episodes are probably only going to cover a couple days at a time until he started to perk up a little bit, come out of the woods a little bit, because it's a lot of information. I don't want these to be too crazy long. And it's hard. It's emotional because he's 2.5 now. He had just turned 2 in March of this year. So he was just over 2 when he got sick. And we weren't sure, 1, if he was going to live, 2, if he did live, if the laminitis episode he had was going to be too severe to save. So we really needed to get x-rays to see what was going on in the foot. We weren't able to trailer him to an equine hospital. There were spots available. My vet was talking to the internal team at the equine hospitals that we can reach. Throughout this whole process, they were in contact with that internal team, but they had a spot for him, but there was no way I was going to safely get him there. That after that first weekend, which we haven't covered yet, we went into a huge heat wave. So we were in like 40 degrees Celsius plus days with humidity. Trailering a horse in those conditions, a healthy horse in those conditions, is dangerous enough. There was no way. And he couldn't walk. He was laying down for probably total 22 or 23 hours a day. There was no way that I was going to get him trailered. And first tears, I was concerned that, we might not make it out. So if he needed to be let go, I wanted him to be at home. So, which was not what we wanted, and thankfully didn't happen. But you can see how hard, the first few days were. So, thank you for listening. Hopefully all the pictures have passed now. I will be sure to film the next episode soon. and I believe we go Friday overnight until Sunday, I believe, in the next episode. So hopefully you stick around. I hope this was helpful. If your horse is going through Potomac horse fever at any point, or it has, I'm so sorry. If your horse has experienced laminitis, either as a result of an illness or an injection or metabolic, or I'm so sorry. And yeah, thankfully my guy is still with me and we're recovering the foot as best we can. I will share the x-rays. We tested his hay, we did all kinds of stuff. So thank you everyone so much for listening and tuning in to episode 1 of the Stronger Strides podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. If you're listening on any of your podcast providers, thank you. If you could like, comment, share, subscribe, rate, get in touch, any of those things would be so appreciated. We are on YouTube, TikTok, podcast providers, Instagram, and Facebook. So search up Stronger Strides, find a black and white patchy pony, and you will have found us. Thanks so much for listening to all that crazy detailed stuff. And I will see you on the next episode of Stronger Strides.